Don Garbutt here. This is part 2B of the Building a Router series. The router is going to enable us to have any number of modulation sources and send them to modulation destinations. The first thing we're going to do is build a new macro. Control-click or right-click, choose Macro New 2 In 2 Out, and let's name it. The inputs to the router are the sources of modulation. As I mentioned before, I've got envelope generators in a stacked macro. We can add onto this perhaps some low-frequency oscillators and some other features, but let's work with it as it is for now. We have 4 envelope outputs here, and I've also added a velocity and controller number 1 mod wheel source. To get the velocity and controller number 1 objects, go to built-in module MIDI in on velocity, and built-in module MIDI in controller, and set the controller number here in the functions display of the object. For mod wheel, it's controller number 1. And connect those 2 objects to the input ports of your router. As we move along, it's a good idea to label the input ports. Now let's connect the 4 outputs of the envelope generators coming out of the stacked macro. Remember to command click and you'll automatically get a port. And we can label them. Before we build the insides of the router, I'm going to recommend that we connect it to its targets. So if we hold the command key down, we can create output terminals of the router. So here we've got the 4 volume connections into the oscillators. Then we've got 2 filter cutoff point links and the connection that comes in to control the formant and the pulse width modulation of the final oscillator and name them. Now let's go inside the router and let's organize the pile of terminals. Now we've got our input terminals and our output terminals. Now inside the router module as we are, build another macro and call it patcher and connect the input and output terminals to the patcher and label them. The reason why we have a macro inside a macro is because we're actually going to build more than one of these, and it'll be easy to duplicate the one that we've built. Now open up the patcher macro and organize your terminals. Now create a blank macro. This macro is going to serve as our source switcher. Connect up the input terminals to the macro and label them. Let's label this source switcher macro as source. Now let's go inside the source macro and delete the right terminal and label the left terminal X. We're building an X-type router, so this output is going to correspond with the position of this bar. Now let's go back out for a second. You can see the X output here. Now get a math object called multiply. We're actually going to hook the X up to the top and bottom terminals of the multiply object. This is going to enable the X output value to be multiplied by itself to produce an exponential output. Let's complete the activity on this level before we go inside the source module. Now what we need is an object called a distributor panner. Route the output of the multiplier into the input of the distributor panner. We need to change the number of output ports on the distributor panner. That value is changed in this box over here, in the functions of the selected object. We actually need 9 positions. The top position we're going to use as an off setting. So put the number 9 in the port number here. And press the enter key, and you see now we have 9 ports. Awesome. You can go ahead and hook up the ports 1 through 8 to these terminals. Now we're going to need a list module to control the switching of the distributor from the built-in modules panel menu. I'm renaming it destination, and we'll call it the destination module, even though it's a list module. Select the destination module and begin to make entries in this list here by using the append button. We'll make as many entries as we have ports here. So we'll make entries 0 through 8. But notice that it gave it values 1 through 8. So let's change those values. So we have 0 through 8, and let's name these for the targets that these terminals represent. Now let's take a quick look out on our control surface. This is the old router. Let's push it out of the way so that we can see here, router module macro. Let's adjust its view to give it a 3D frame and a label. Remember, our list object is called destination. As I moved it out of the way, we can see this little thing here. This is the source module, which we haven't developed yet, so don't worry about that. The destination module would probably look nicer if we changed its module type from a text panel to a menu. And perhaps you want to resize the width of the menu so that now you can see a nice pull-down menu with all our targets in it. So that's the destination part of the patcher organized. Now let's go into the source module. Once again, we have to organize our terminals. Inside our source module, the first thing we need is a switch. We can get that from the menu, built-in module, panel, switch. This switch will allow us to choose from our various modulation inputs. So what we have to do is attach all our input modulation sources to points on the switch. And again, that's done by just dragging the cable with the command button down. Label these ports. We'll need one more terminal. Let's call this output. Route the output of the switch to the output terminal. As we look at the control panel, I'm going to suggest a few graphic changes. I recommend changing the source switch to a menu and sizing the menu to match the bottom. So now we have a patcher with a source, a destination, and all we need is the display controller section, which sits in the middle here. Go back into your source module and create a macro. This could be an empty macro, and label it display. Let's go inside that macro and build a terminal, an out port, that is. And now what we need in here is an XY module. This module serves as an XY controller and also as a display for input material. I'll add a few more details in the next video about making it an XY controller and adding more of them. Now we need a merge module. Connect the output of the MX port to the merge module. This means that our mouse moves will send messages to the merge module and connect the output of the merge module to the input of the XY module. Inputs are for display purposes, so this means that the mouse moves that we make will show up on the display. Let's make a few adjustments on the graphic display here. Select the XY module, and on View, turn off its label and turn off Show Value. Our source module is showing a frame and a label. Let's turn those off as well. Our display module is showing a frame and a label. Let's turn those off. And now let's resize the XY module. And while we're at it, let's turn off the word destination. That's the label on the destination module. And if you want, you can take off this cross display here on the XY module. For our X module purposes today, let's turn this off completely. Under cursor type, none. Let's label the output port X. You're probably saying to yourself, when are we going to be done here? Well, we're coming down the home stretch. One of the things we need to do is to add a constant on the Y2 port. Control-click, create constant, and set its value to 1. This way our X controller will have a constant illumination height of 1. You'll see that in a second. And there are two more things we need here. We need a step filter module, and attach the merge module to the input of the step filter. Connect the output of the step filter module to an event smoother, and connect the output of the event smoother to the X output. Now when we go out of the display module and connect the X to the X port, we see our display come alive. Now exit the source module and connect the output to the multiplier. This is the last connection we have to make here. So drag and hold the command key down and connect it here. And you might have noticed the envelope generator coming alive, and that means that our circuit is working. In fact, why don't we just shorten the y-axis since we're not using it for now? And let's try it out. Envelope generator 1 controlling the volume of oscillator 1. And we're in business. The final detail about the XY control is that you might want to change the range. It defaults to a +1 and a -1 here. If that was the case, you'd get a display something like this. And this will actually work, but it's bipolar. And most of our targets have a bipolar implementation on them anyway, so I'd leave this set at 0. There you go. I know it's a dull sound after all that hard work, but it's just the beginning of an adventure. Thanks for watching.